Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's BAInsights, in which we'll be talking about user personas. And once again, really happy to have two guests with me, possibly a third later, to talk about the topic. But let's let them introduce themselves, starting with you, please, Sinead.
Yeah, I'm Sinead Torley. I'm a principal sales consultant for Head Consulting. I've been in business analysis for about 10 years now. Prior to being a consultant, I was predominantly in the public sector.
Thank you, Sinead. And over to you as well, please, Sam.
Hi, yes, I'm Sam Houghton. I'm a senior business analyst. I've been in the role now for about a few months for senior, and I've been a business analyst for about 4 years. And prior to that, I was actually a developer. So I have a little bit of insight onto that side as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, and as you said, I mean, it's good to have a perspective, not just from the BA and the person who's producing sometimes the personas, but maybe from the consuming end as well of a persona as well. All right, but perhaps let's start with the first question around user personas. Really, what is a user persona, and why is it important in the context of business analysis? And Sinead, if I could ask you that question first, please.
Yeah, so I think the user persona is like a fictional presentation of your user or a customer that you're ultimately designing a product or a solution for. And it allows you normally on a one pager to kind of really see and bring that user to life and bring out things like the characteristics or motivations and pain points, demographics can kind of make you really understand that user, how best maybe to communicate with them, how maybe to tailor some things for them, support they might need, and ultimately kind of tap into that emotional intelligence and empathy, put yourself into their shoes really, and give it, a bit of personality rather than just an end user. I think it's really important for business analysis to have that personal touch to it.
Brilliant. And I like the point about the personality. It just brings things to life a little bit more, rather than as we sometimes do, might just have a list of these users we've spoken to. If we can sort of represent them together as a theoretical persona, it does bring things to life a little bit. Sam, would you mind offering your perspective on it as well, please?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think it's really helpful to have sort of allow a common language across the different people that are involved in a project as well. Everybody kind of knows, if you mention a persona that you've got and you've called them Sarah, your stakeholders know, your developers know, your tester, everybody involved in the project knows who you're talking about and what that persona kind of represents. So that really sort of helps, again, sort of bring around that empathy and that emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I think the point you made as well about communication really does help that communication, because if you can, all of us can visualize the different types of customer that we're delivering a product for, and we can think about them a little bit more than just, there's an end user who might work in finance, or there's an end user who works in a bank, as an example. To have a view of their more personal types of traits, which are represented perhaps of people who we have met, just brings things to life a little bit more, and maybe we can take a bit more ownership of the products and the solutions that we deliver on their behalf. Excellent. So in terms of really what the good to know, and I'll start with you, Sam, this time, in terms of the situations in which user personas would be appropriate to create and or use.
Yeah, so I find them to be sort of most useful in projects where you have sort of different types of user that you're working with. It just really helps you kind of consider all the different aspects of sort of requirements and user needs. I did some training, it was a while back now, on it, and the scenario that we had was building a cinema app, and each kind of group was there to create a single user persona. So we had like Mike, who was a film enthusiast and liked to write reviews, and then Sarah, who was like a mom of two, working part-time and things like that, and then you had Adam, who was like a teenager, kind of glued to their smartphone type thing, and each sort of individual persona that you had sort of highlighted a specific area of things that different people wanted. So Mike wanted somewhere to go and see what's coming up, and can we go and see it and then write a review on it and share what his thoughts were, whereas Sarah wanted something where she could kind of filter based on sort of age groups depending on like the age of her children, and then Adam, the teenager, maybe wanted something that he can have on his phone, or maybe can like check in and maybe like win like, you know, tickets to the cinema and things like that. So individually they weren't that useful, but when you actually brought it together, it meant that you had like a really sort of well-rounded kind of product that you were delivering. So yeah, I think that's really helpful. Though you do need to have like a good balance, because you know you can always end up with maybe too many personas, and then the kind of value of them kind of diminishes a little bit. They are meant to be a little bit more kind of general to the types of user using your solution or your product.
At least in that example, it shows as well that and it really reflects in a quite effective way that there are quite different types of user who will need different things from what it is you're producing and what it is you're building as well. So yeah, I think that's quite a neat way of summarising it. Thank you, Sam. Sinead?
Yeah, just to echo what Sam said, you know, anywhere where you've got a diverse range of users, you know, perhaps it's been rolled out like enterprise-wide, or something that's like maybe a learning management system where you've got lots of different, like again, types of users that have got different perspectives on it. But in terms of situations as well, I think using it as early as possible in the, you know, pre-project, even for your business case, because it can really help you contextualize and understand the problem that you're trying to address as well. So I think thinking about your users quite early on and their needs quite early on can even influence things like the project documentation, like the business case, and obviously early design. You can identify things a lot sooner and obviously save time and money, you know, then fixing those when they crop up later on. So I think thinking about them when you do your stakeholder identification, when you're thinking about what the problem is that you're trying to address, I think, you know, thinking it's about the persona perspective as soon as you can, I think would be really beneficial as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and it makes me think as well when you're saying that, Sinead, that you know, it'd be quite a useful tool if we are doing, say, benchmarking as an example, to try and think about who the target audience are that we might be benchmarking, to get some views on that. I think as well, we know that we're going to be mapping process or user journeys as well, just to provide a bit more context about who those users are before we start either delving into their current process or exploring what their target process might be. It just gives us that bit of context, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think they're really useful right the way through the project, you know, like you said, Sinead, right at the start, but equally like towards the end, if you're thinking about, okay, now we've built this and we want to send out some comms or do some training on it, kind of knowing, okay, you know, what people kind of are drawn to in terms of their training and the communication. Do they want something quick and snappy? Do they want something a little bit more, you know, personal, like one-on-one training, for example? Do they want like a video that you can go and watch in their own time? Even things like that towards the end of a project, it can be really beneficial there as well.
I imagine that you know, we can prioritize things based on persona as well. Like we can start to, you know, either build a solution that's specific to a particular persona, or at least explore the features and functionality that maybe the highest priority group might be. You know, I suppose what comes with that as well is trying to determine the criteria for why one group is higher priority than another, of course. But maybe that's something to get into another time. But yeah, a few good examples there of the types of situation when a user persona would actually be a useful tool to use. And as you both rightly said, you know, there's many points from the very start, probably right to way to the end, really, when we think about supporting the test team, when user personas can be appropriate to bring out. I wonder then, perhaps I'll start with Sinead this time, in terms of how you typically go about producing those personas or thinking about the personas.
Yes, I think with being a consultant as well, working with different organisations, it's always worth actually checking if there are already any that exist, you know, maybe from a previous project or maybe from a different department, you know, maybe business change managers or user researchers. So maybe first actually check if any exist that you can reuse or revisit, or if a template exists, I think would be a good start. If not, there's quite good templates now on Miro and other tools. If you didn't know where to start, you could use one of those as a starting point. Then in terms of getting the data, it's really going out and doing your research, you know, talking to those people, having interviews, maybe even do a quick survey. In terms of things like the demographics, where are they located, what's, you know, maybe the age, the gender, etc. And if possible, getting that backed up as well, maybe with some real data, perhaps if I get it from HR, or again, if there is some user research is available to validate that data, would be really useful. But doing things like day in the life of would be really useful, and observing their processes. I know it's a bit harder now we're working remotely, but if possible, I would recommend going and actually literally stepping in their shoes, go and, witness the environment that they're working in. What are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are they complaining about? Or, what makes them take that type of thing? All that kind of observation is really helpful in gathering that information. And then once you've got all that information, analysing it, kind of grouping it, maybe seeing where there's some commonalities, and then from that kind of determining how many personas or which personas you want to create, but be careful not to overgeneralise. You don't just want like managers and retail staff, etc. You want to kind of go into that deeper level, because within managers you might have 3 or 4 personalities within there. So I think it's trying to find things where they've got common behaviours, or goals, or maybe everyone from a particular place or location might be helpful. So I think, yeah, trying to grouping it based on where there's some commonalities would be a good start. And from that, you might be able to come up with, a handful of different personas. And then you've got the fun bit of kind of maybe having an avatar or a photo and a name, a little bit of a backstory, if you think that would be useful. And then getting that validated, like I say, by other people, maybe by the users themselves. Do they think that's a true representative of them and their departments and their, pain points? And also maybe other, peer review designers or your developers, if they've also had some dealings with those users, do they think that's, a true representation? Get their input into it. And then, yeah, sharing them really is a good way of getting some further input into it, and making sure that they're, available to other people. And then I think remembering as well that they're kind of a living document. So as things change in the environment, the personas might change as well. So I think thinking of them as a living document and remembering to update them, and continue building it, as like we said before, as you can use it through the full life cycle. You might find out some more information that would be useful to add into those personas as well.
And it's interesting the point around just making sure you're sharing the information all the way through, from the data points to the type of personas that you've identified, or where you're grouping personas as well. So it gives, it means that the BA doesn't have to rely on being the expert for the organisation or for the product or for the situation. They can rely on those that really are the experts to suggest more appropriate themes or groupings or user personas. Because as you said, we could quite easily say you're a manager, so therefore that's a persona. But if they're quite different types of managers using the tool in a slightly different way, it's going to be really important to call that out as well. Yeah, so excellent. And you covered a load there, Sinead. So good luck, Sam. I think finding the additional bits there.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, Sinead definitely covered a lot of what I was going to say to that one. I guess, just kind of echoing, the importance of going back to some of the people that you've spoken to. Again, just sort of making sure that you aren't kind of bringing in any assumptions or just only kind of considering your own views, because it's not really about you. That's why you're creating the persona, so that you have a real life, or as real life as you can get, person to kind of draw back to and draw from, their behaviors and their needs and their sort of pain points and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, in ways that I can sometimes approach this, it does depend, of course, on the situation. Is that if I'm going in entirely cold and I have no real background around a particular set of roles or organisation, I might do some research up front to try and establish who are the likely types of roles or groups actually at that organisation. Try and have a view perhaps of either what my perception is for that organisation, or perhaps based on my knowledge of others, as to what might be some of their considerations, some of their pain points, some of the types of person that I want to try and interview, so that it gives and maybe take some examples of other personas as well. So as I start to have these conversations with my new set of stakeholders, they can appreciate what we're aiming to achieve, maybe some of those other perspectives and themes and variations as well that we might need to bring in. So I think that's that's one way I do approach it. And I think for me, it's sort of almost like I either interview a few people at the organisation, turn them into personas, and then we evolve from there. Or it's that first example where, you know, I try and formulate a very basic view of the personas just for my own benefit. And then quite often they get torn apart, which is quite fine. But it just means at least I've got some understanding that we're moving apart, and then they'll actually get to the right outcomes as well. You know, it's quite nice for me, I think, for the users as well, who perhaps haven't seen personas all the time, to have a view as to what it is that they're being asked to contribute to. And you know, there's like anything we produce, I think, as BAs, you know, it's nice to be able to share why it is we're going using a particular technique, the benefit of it, how we're going to share it, and then how we're going to communicate with that stakeholder in the future as well. You know, and perhaps, I mean, it occurs to me that as we're building out our stakeholder lists and our stakeholder matrix, as we often do, you know, as we start to pinpoint individual representatives who are, you know, who would represent a particular persona, maybe that's another attribute that we can add to our stakeholder metrics to show what type of persona they're representing as well. I think beyond that, then I think so we've spoken about what are personas, when they're useful, how to create them. I feel like we've touched on as well a few sort of like attributes or pieces of information that we record as personas. But do you have a view? And I'll start with you, Sam, on this one. Is there any typical attributes that you would look to cover, or like the more important ones at least?
Yeah. Just before I answer, my neighbour is cutting my grass, so if that's noisy, please let me know and I'll shut the window.
Can't hear anything at all. But if they do need to advertise their gardening services in the Edinburgh area, let us know. But no, thanks for letting us know, Sam.
Cool. Yeah, I think, like you say, we kind of covered or touched on a few of them. I think the ones that I kind of find really kind of bring out a lot of benefit are like the motivation. So what's driving their actions and their choices and their behaviors. And then the sort of frustrations and concerns, you know, what's wrong, what doesn't work currently, what are their pain points, where do they see sort of the core gaps in their current process, say it is. I also find it really useful to have sort of, for some projects, if it's suitable, obviously, the sort of, you know, technological skill level or skill level in certain items. I think that really kind of helps right the way through, you know, again, sort of thinking about the communication with different users and stakeholders, that can really help bring that into light. And it kind of helps you have that in your back pocket of, okay, well, I know when I speak to that person, this is their sort of skill level with this, so I'll formulate it in this kind of way as opposed to this alternative way. And I know, again, we kind of mentioned it, sort of having a name and a face attached to the persona kind of really helps, again, with that sort of empathy and having that common language, really having a face to the name really kind of helps drive that out and ensures that there's sort of engagement with the people that you're working with as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, I think certainly having a name, it seems quite odd to me, or it did at one point, you know, like, well, why do we have to really go to find a name rather than just call it persona one? But it's much nicer throughout the duration of the engagement to talk about like this theoretical Sam or Sinead or John than it is persona one, because you're like, what does that actually mean? And I'll go back and try and figure it out again. Yeah, no, I would agree. I think as well, I mean, well, actually, I'll let Sinead give us a view on what additional points you might capture as well, Sinead.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Sam said about the technology. Is a good one. I know I've included IT literacy levels before, and especially if you're rolling out something like some tablets onto a plant where they predominantly used, you know, pen and paper for however many years. I think it's really important to kind of consider that technology, you know, if they're technophobic or need extra support, or are they used to using at home versus at work. I think it's quite worthwhile. And again, go back to that communication, it's worth knowing how they receive that information. You know, I've worked at a place before where they had you know, one shared PC for 20+ people that they only logged on once a week to do the timesheet with. So, you know, sending out emails or internet updates wouldn't have reached them. It wouldn't have been, you know, fallen on deaf ears. So things like, oh, actually, I found out that they had quite a lot of time in the tea room or the cafeteria, and they put some some flyers or some posters up there, or where they're scanning in the morning. So little things like that, how, you know, how do they get their information, how do they receive their information? Either, you know, that's just a physical barrier, but or maybe that's just a preference. I think it's worth even documenting things like that can be useful. And I think Sam covered most of it there, but yeah, just like some demographic things sometimes help with that type of information as well, doesn't it? Knowing where they're based and, you know, ages and etc. can help. Again, picking that up with data rather than assumptions is really important.
That's it. Yeah, I think that demographic type of information is often just important, just to make people and ourselves realise that we're delivering to a very broad range, typically, and diverse set of stakeholders. So, you know, just by, it may not appear important that we've put like someone's 18, someone else is 68, but by doing that, it shows that actually there's very different types of users who will have different experiences of technology and of processes or etc. And probably the same goes for why it's important to show some representative locations as well of the stakeholders. But for me, that's certainly a reason to use some of that demographic information, rather than to just imply that if you're a certain demographic, you can have a very specific need that's quite different than someone else. And perhaps it's similar when it comes to sort of like technology skills or technical skills, in that it's probably not the case that we're going to start designing a solution for one persona that fits that persona's technical capability. But by looking at the technical capabilities across our personas, we'll find a tool and solution that's actually easy to use for all of them and at all levels as well. So I think sometimes it's just, for me, taking that step back and realising that's the importance of some of these attributes that we're capturing, and why we're doing it, and why it helps bring the population of users to life a little bit as well. I think for me, I mean, I think, yeah, we've probably covered everything else. I think probably adding on that as well, I think sometimes it can be useful to try and call out sort of like hobbies or interests or values of particular individuals, because it shows that you know, maybe even if the product isn't obviously necessary for someone who's particularly analytical, or someone who's very like visual driven, perhaps by calling out some of these different themes in terms of different types of interests that people have, it can cause us to think about, you know, delivering a solution that might appeal to different individuals who are maybe more aligned to receiving their information verbally, or in words, or in pictures, to name just a few examples as well. I wonder, then another question that occurs to me is that, you know, how you communicate the personas to other stakeholders and team members, just to make sure that the user personas themselves are effectively utilised. So perhaps, Sam, in this case, you know, you might have a technology perspective as well on this one. And I wonder, I'll ask Sinead first in the way, though, and then come back to Arthur.
I think it's kind of trying to incorporate into your project documentation, or that might be user stories, and maybe do it as part of like storytelling. That's quite, you know, popular these days. So actually, when you're doing you know, a user story or requirement, you know, mentioning, you know, Sarah or Bob or John, and rather than just kind of saying again, you know, the line manager needs to, or the user needs to, if you're actually bringing that again to life and aligning it to an existing persona that everyone is maybe already familiar with, or you just like to introduce it, I think again that helps to actually make it more real and bring it to life. So I think, yeah, just incorporating where you can alongside your project documentation, and like I said before, making sure that it is visible and accessible to everyone that's working on the project, or that maybe needs to use those personas themselves, you know, designers or developers or marketing. They could do some targeted communications to certain personas. So I think it's just having that awareness that they exist, you know, not keeping them to yourself, sharing them, letting people know what they can be used for, and what you've used them for. All that might help other people be able to share them as well, and see how they might fit into the work that they're doing. And again, yeah, getting sure they get validated and that other people can contribute to them. Like you say, they might think of something that you haven't thought of, or they might be able to share some wider insight that you haven't had. So yeah, just incorporating where possible, I think.
I think that point around sharing is important as well, Sinead, because it sort of takes us back to the point I think you made right at the start in terms of, looking for pre-existing personas. I think if you're in the habit of, once you produce a persona, of sharing them out, putting them somewhere where they can be found for future initiatives, future projects, then overall it will improve the quality perhaps of the personas, or at least the availability of them, and mean that maybe future teams or future individuals don't have to go through the good work that you might go through. And Sam, I'd take your perspective as well, please.
Yeah, I think, for short and sweet answer would be, share them early and refer to them regularly. I think we kind of mentioned before that, having them there throughout the full life cycle of your project, regardless of what it is, just, really kind of ensures that you have that engagement and you're not randomly bringing them up, like, a few months in and people are like, what is this? I've never heard of it before. I think, having sessions to like have an overview with the stakeholders and sort of key team members and give them a space to ask questions, and again helping you kind of refine them, actually maybe we need to do a little bit more work on this persona, or that's a really good point, we hadn't considered that. And again, just really bringing them to life. I think having like the stakeholders involved in creating them as well can again just bring about that early engagement and that early adoption of it, and it just kind of getting people engaged nice and early, and so they can see like the benefit of, okay, so you've used them here and this is the output of that, and I understand that output and I can see the benefit that that's driven, therefore I'll use them for my section and I can refer back to that. You have that common language again across everyone who's involved, and I think it's again, that sort of shared language just really helps bring everything to life. And I guess as a developer, if you don't always get that closely involved with the sort of end users, it gives you that kind of, I'm building this for this person, as opposed to I'm going to put this feature in because I think it's quite nice, which is very easy to fall into as a trap.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you build on that, I think, and take perhaps the personas that Sinead pulled out, when you're putting the personas together at the very earliest point in the project, share them with the development team, share them with your test stakeholders, so that, because they may be some very specific questions that they want to consider that might not be part of your pre-existing template that you were thinking of. So I think it's a good way then of making sure that you're asking the right questions, and your personas will actually start to show the type of information that's going to guide the developers, or guide the architects or testers, or anyone else for that matter, or quite often guide those that overseeing the projects as well, and the change. It's quite often we don't have that detailed perspective until the analysis is done as well, I'd say. Good. I think the only additional thing I would add to what you both said is, for me, it's just about continuing to utilize that persona, or each persona, making sure they're reflected as you start talking about processes or requirements or stories, or anything really. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a case of overkill, but just making sure that they're not just seen as a tick in the box. We think about the personas. Now we're going to ignore them, and we're going to write some stories that theoretically don't really relate back. So it's probably good to think about practically how we can prompt ourselves and the team to do that, and how we can make sure that's happening. So there's potentially like traceability or labeling stories as well, might be another good way, just to make sure that we are actually using the information that we've got.
I think in addition to that, sorry, I was going to say, I think in addition to that, having I think it's one of those things that's really easy for people to just kind of skip over, like especially if things need to be done quickly. It's like, oh well, we just won't bother, they're not that useful. But actually taking the time to do them can actually really aid that conversation further down the line. And I think again, it's just kind of showing people that actually they can be really beneficial, and it's a really beneficial tool to have.
It makes me think, as you were both talking as well, in terms of many elements of the personas we produce will be taken from like what we've understood from certain stakeholders, some of their characteristics and their needs. Really, I would imagine that the stakeholders should be able to look at the user personas and recognise an element or two in there that is a appropriate to them. Hopefully more than an element or two. Anyway, but yeah, just something that occurs to me. And I guess to end in terms of the questions, Sam, I'll start with you on this one. In terms of just any hints or tips that you're able to share in terms of for others that are maybe picking up personas for the first time or are not too experienced or advanced in using them, tips that you found useful.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sinead mentioned it earlier. There's so many sort of templates online to give you a really good starting point. But again, I think with most things, it's always good to kind of reflect on them as you go, try it out, see how it went. Okay, what went well? What could we maybe try differently? And also sort of considering, your audience that you're sharing it with. What is it that they specifically need to see? These people might be more interested in the data behind it. These people might be more interested in, okay, what are their specific pain points and what isn't quite working? And then other people may be more interested in that sort of, what's their technical skill level, what's their IT literacy sort of sitting at. And just kind of, you can have one persona kind of chopped up in different ways, so it's the same persona, but maybe the way that you share it is slightly different, depending on the audience that you've got. And then again, it's already been mentioned, but just it's a living document, so making sure that you kind of review them and update them regularly as environments change. The persona themselves could change, and I think just making sure that they're up to date, again, just really make sure that they themselves are sort of close to real life as possible.
And I think just in that last point, it's really, really important to get the team thinking about, being able and comfortable to change personas or indeed any information that occurs to them. It's not an exercise in creating a persona, as you said, and it's locked in for life. Yeah. If someone identifies some other useful characteristics or useful inputs from their conversations, then definitely integrate them into the personas. But then importantly, don't tell people what you've done it. So there's a slightly different perspectives or attributes to consider. Yeah, I really like those points. And Sinead?
I think just what I mentioned before, if it's possible, try and get that first-hand experience. You pick up that tacit knowledge, things people might not think to tell you if you were just having a chat on the phone or something. I think if you can go and actually observe the environment. Again, I know, like I said, it's difficult, maybe depending on where they're located and where you are, and if possible, that observation and that first-hand experience just give you a lot more insight into than just having a one-to-one with somebody. And probably just a word of warning if you are obviously sharing with other people, trying to make sure you don't put anything there that would maybe upset anybody, that would, just be careful of what you put in there, that not to cause any offence to anybody. And then what we mentioned before about not too generic, so be quite specific, and if possible, like you say, get that data, maybe do a survey. You can do like a really quick, anonymous survey on kind of the demographic side of it, and using that data to validate your personas would be really useful as well, so that you're not making those broad assumptions which could be incorrect.
And from doing those, like taking a couple of those examples, like the observation and the survey, start with the survey perhaps first, it means that it's a bit more comfortable, I think, to sort of acquire the data you need. Sometimes it might feel uncomfortable, or it might be difficult to ask loads and loads of questions around, not only the basics, like where you're located, but, what are your typical behaviours, what are the things you enjoy. If you're given a survey, you can maybe think about it a little bit more, so that the questioning is quite consistent and everybody gets a chance to respond in a similar way as well. But I guess the flip side is observation, of course, where by observing the individual, it can paint some pictures that you hadn't seen previously. And I agree, there's no better alternative than sitting next to the users quite often, because you get to see the things they've told you about, but also the things perhaps that they don't, or the things they haven't really, they just take for granted. But sometimes, well, just the advantage of being there in person is that you overhear some conversations from other potential users that you should have factored in that you haven't, and you can sort of go and introduce yourself, show them the personas, and have a chat with them as well. So plenty of benefits. I think the only thing I would add on top of those that I might one of my tips is just to try to make the personas as visually interesting and engaging as possible. I think really that's advice that I would apply to everything, not just personas, but it certainly helps if they look interesting and professional and got the information set out in a very logical way. It really doesn't hurt sometimes to put some branding on the personas as well for like the organisations you're in and working in, or maybe the teams that they were a part of, because it's just another visual way to identify where that user is coming from and their perspective. But I think that probably my only point on that, as you both done an excellent job on that last question, as you have all of them, I should add as well. So with that in mind, I mean, I feel like we've covered in a fairly short space of time quite a lot to get anybody up to speed in terms of what is a user persona, how to use them, and a few hints and tips, and a bit more as well, of course. So with that in mind, I mean, I think really the only thing left to do is to thank you both for your time. Thank you for sharing your insights as well. And I definitely look forward to seeing you and hearing from you again, not just on user personas, but on other BA related topics within the community as well. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.